The Holy Grail War, Volume 1, The Hedgehog, by Armanis Ar-feinial. Prologue, The Flames of War. The monsters and demons aren't hiding in my closet or underneath my bed. I'd be fortunate if they were that far away. No, they are all running amok inside of my head, and they're relentless. Chapter 1. It was supposed to be a training exercise, nothing more, but on that day, a war hero walked into his own execution. Guns roared and engines revved, bullets fired from all directions, striking metallic debris of crushed helicopters and planes. Blood painted the desert sand of Nevada crimson, and limbs were sprawled over the sand mounds. Humvees were blown to pieces. Many of those Humvees still had bodies in them. The rotting carcasses were wreathed in flames as their arms hung out the windows, blood dripping down into the sand like oil. Ghost, in his black fatigues and cavere, smelled the putrid rotting of flesh, and he heard the buzzing of flies as they roamed above the corpses littering the desert. His limbs were heavy, and his body hot with the oppressive scorching wind and pelting of sand. Ghost ducked behind the bags of sand, his heart pounding. He knew his brain was searing these images into the back of his mind, never to be forgotten should he miraculously make it out alive today. But didn't he want to? He covered his hand with his mouth as Slithers, Ticker, and Butcher crouched to his side, hiding behind the sandbags. The gunfire finally subsided. Slithers' bloody hand covered her mouth as she stifled a cry, knowing that even the slightest sound would give away their position to the Americans. The Americans they swore to protect and fight for. Did they? Ghost took several measured breaths. His heart pounded, trying to free itself from its fleshy prison, doomed to die. He cursed to himself, swearing under his breath. His right hand trembled, his fingers coming dangerously close to the trigger, ready to fire into the scorching hot sand. Words rattled inside of his mind like an echo chamber. Treason. He felt the ground around him suddenly tremble, just like his hand did. He stifled a gasp. He jerked his head upward, still covered by the sandstorm. Humvees rolled over the dirt of the desert, driving on the roads and shifting the sands around its tires. The Humvee drove past, and he was allowed a moment's rest. Just a moment. No telling when the helicopters would soar overhead and ping his location. What is happening? I don't understand any of this, he thought to himself. Time to go, he said. His eyes scanned the horizon while peering his head just above the sandbags. Ghost. Butcher's face was grave, her hands trembling at her sides, her teeth gritted. Why did we do nothing? They are dead because we did nothing. What did you do? She turned her head to him, her blood-stained hair swinging in the air as she snarled at him. I did nothing. You did nothing. They did nothing, he replied, knowing full well and bearing the guilt of killing the four that were down there. This was his fault. I let them die. As always, whenever lives were lost, his heart felt weaker, being restrained by those imaginary lines that occasionally, if by accident, rose up to the surface of his skin. The guilt swept over his chest, and his heart felt like it was bleeding inside. You and I both know none of us were making it out alive tonight. These last few moments are going to be the most defining moments in our time. We were born to live and die in obscurity, but we need to go. We'll see them again before the night is over, on the other side. A tear escaped his eye. But damn it all, we are blowing up Area 51 and taking every last one of those sons of bitches with us. That will be our legacy, and perhaps they'll learn their lesson to not repeat this mistake ever again. We were just unlucky. That's all. We were just 32 monsters who got the unfortunate short stick. Ghost! That is not enough. We need to do more than just bang. Ghost saw a flash in the distance. The bullet howled, whistling in the air. He immediately turned to face Butcher, knowing the trajectory of the bullet. He was filled with a sense of dread, and he opened his mouth to scream, but nothing came out. Butcher was next, and then there would be 3. He winced as the flashing bullet grazed his cheek. His heart raced as the shot missed him, and his pupil watched the bullet in front of him, spinning as it soared through the air. He was in a daze, not knowing how the sniper knew they were here, watching the firing squad, or was he just watching all along? The bullet penetrated a Butcher's eye. Ghost's brown eyes opened wide as he gasped. Blood sprayed all over the place as she was knocked down with the bullet shards entering out the back of her head. Fortunately for her, though blind in one eye now and in excruciating pain, all the shards miraculously missed the brain. Ghost blinked as the blood sprayed. Ticker ducked down immediately, pulling out his beret M82, relaxing his grip. His eyes aimed down the barrel of his rifle. His rifle swiftly swayed as he surveilled the sandy horizon for the sniper. He found the sniper. The bright reflection of the scope got his attention as the sniper was taking aim again. His trigger finger curled around the trigger. The trigger clicked back. The rifle shot immediately and flared the end of his barrel. The round reached the sniper's cover, forcing the sniper to pick up his rifle and hide at a different location. The gunfire was so loud that it nearly deafened Slither's ears, who covered them with both of her hands. Her face grimaced and tears streamed down her face. Her limbs trembled and her eyes were gaped open. Her brown hair dripped blood on the ground from her sides. Ghost heard the ringing in his ears, just like everything else, hand-me-downs for earplugs. Butcher cackled a raspy laugh, her voice cracking. Pain. It hurts. Ghost, it hurts. Isn't it great? I can feel pain. Her tone became soft. Her arms and fingers trembled, and her other eye wide open. She set one hand over her wounded eye, and blood seeped through the cracks of her fingers. She took several deep breaths. Did they feel it too? She sat up and ripped off a piece of her sleeve and wrapped it around her eye. I bet I look dashing. Damn it all. We can't sneak back there then. Butcher struggled to get to her feet and drew her MK-16. You said it. We're not getting out of this alive. Not one of us. I'll buy you time. After tonight, we're gonna make sure they never mess with Task Force 7 again. After all, there won't be a Task Force 7. Butcher jumped out from behind the sandbags and, latching onto a flash grenade, tossed the black cylinder. She closed her eyes. The grenade made a deafening explosion, with bright white lights with the soldiers nearby. The noise deafened more ears as she aimed her rifle down, firing at the temporarily blinded soldiers staggering over their own feet, some stumbling for cover behind sand mounds. Soldiers further away started firing upon her. Bullets pelted her limbs. As if on instinct, she pulled out a smoke grenade and dropped it to her feet. Run, damn it. Ghost, Ticker, and Slither immediately turned around and sprinted away from the execution zone. He could hear the rapid gunfire from the distance. He could hear the whirring of the helicopter blades in the distance with his overly sensitive ears. He must stay focused on the mission, ignore the fact that this was the last time he would see Butcher again. The remnants of the Task Force 7 rushed at their inhuman pace, kicking the sands with their strides, which shrouded behind them. The sand got into their boots, heating their feet. Area 51 was not far from them. The base, which kept so many people away successfully, would be penetrated and devoured from within with the rage that filled what remained of Task Force 7. It was at this time, much closer to his objective, did Ghost picture Butcher laying dead, face down on the scorching sand, blood streaming out of her body after being pelted with bullets aplenty. He pictured she died with a defiant smile, a fake one, but perhaps this one in his mind was genuine. He heard the whirring of the helicopters and felt the rumbling of the ground with tanks and armored vehicles with heavy machine guns mounted on them driving in this direction. What remained of Task Force 7 departed with such haste that they couldn't hide their tracks. It's okay. It's okay. Nothing is going to change tonight. We are all going to die, and I have accepted it. Butcher, I'll see you soon. Ghost blinked his eyes. The tears streamed down it, and his face cringed as he stifled another childish cry. Ghost? Ticker said from the front. Do we have a plan, or am I just blowing a hole in the front? This was supposed to be a training exercise. I don't have time for a briefing. Just get in, kill everyone, blow the hole, and we go down into the facility to blow it. Ghost snapped. Nothing about any of this is normal. Maybe with this distraction, we can make it. Slithers never took her eyes off the horizon in front of them. Don't hide it, Ghost. Don't give us hope where there is none. There never was. That promise was bullshit. We can't blow it up if we're dead. Now can we? Ghost replied angrily. Ticker, Slithers, switch. Ticker, while you're running, I need you to prep that bomb. We won't have time to do it when we get there. Ticker let out a deep sigh as he shook his head, his brown hair dropping crusted blood, slowing down to let Slithers pass him. If I screw up, We're gonna be dead before we start. You're the best at it. I trust you. Ghost frowned. We're dead anyway. What difference does it make? Ticker sneered. Those might be the last words you ever say. Ghost saw Ticker swing his rifle over his shoulder and pulled out a large black device out of his satchel, which was just marginally larger than a claymore. The device had blue, green, and red wires of various thickness attached to numerous knobs. Underneath the device was a metal magnet. Ticker moved some of the knobs and turned them. He shifted the wires around, moving them around the knobs and into various tubes inside of the device. Ticker was meticulous. No one knew bombs better than he. Ghost saw the chain-linked fence with guards stationed around, walking back and forth, patrolling the perimeter. The strobing lights swayed in the distance from the sentry tower. The soldiers patrolled in their camouflage gear, their charging American flags patched on their shoulders, something Task Force 7 was forbidden from ever wearing. After all, they were never considered soldiers, their sidearms holstered with singular-shot rifles aimed down to the ground. There were some unarmored Humvees resting about, with the drivers inside, and other soldiers moving heavily reinforced crates onto trucks. Their eyes seemed to scan the perimeter and horizon. Ghost knew Area 51. He knew of all the experiments and weapons development, but one thing they never invested in was security. I guess Task Force 7 was all they ever needed. Rumors and all that kept the common person out, and quite frankly, the absurd rumors of harboring aliens kept enemies' interest in the classified Air Force base low. Surprisingly, but there would be no more wars for a while. Ghost made sure of that. I can't afford mistakes. However, I can't afford the time necessary to prevent them, but nothing about this damn training exercise would be considered normal. We are all that's left, Ghost thought to himself as he considered his options. Slithers, kill him, he ordered from behind, raising his rifle. His eyes barreled down at the iron sights. Ghost noticed, before he looked onward to something else. Slithers, sighing heavily and shaking her head. She was exhausted, he knew that. They all were. Fighting these wars for years was finally taking tolls on them. But this battle, or training, if they want to call it that, this was taking an entire toll on them mentally, killing soldiers with faces they recognized. Ghost heard the sound of her rifle firing several controlled shots. They found their target's head. Blood sprayed out of their body as they collapsed onto the ground. The ruckus of gunfire soon followed in front of them as the loud alarms went off. Ghost lobbed a grenade swiftly out of the fence. It shattered the foundations hidden beneath the gates, forcing them open. Soldiers swarmed out of the buildings, their eyes already aimed down their holographic sights, training their aim on the Task Force 7. Slithers slipped through and made a beeline to the left, dodging behind a building. Ghost moved in front of Ticker as he laid down, suppressing fire. His heart jumped as bullets came for him. The temperature dropped. Red veins covered his eyes. The bullets fired. They appeared to slow. He could track their trajectory, moving his body to avoid being hit in anything vital. The bullets pelted his arms and legs, but none were of high enough caliber to sever him. Ghost knew these soldiers never saw real war, and their weapons were inadequate to the likes of him, a monster. Ghost felt the wounds, the warm blood trickling down his legs. He felt the lead penetrate his body like needles and tear through the other side, spilling more of his own blood behind him. He felt the temperature drop around him as Ticker finished his calibration behind him. But what he could not feel was pain. Yes, they even took that away from them, from all of them. Butcher, what does it feel like? Slithers rushed behind another building, shooting other soldiers who were distracted with Ghost and Ticker on the entrance. She tossed a flash grenade in front of her as she dodged behind the cover of some wooden crates. The crates were not ideal. The bullets would shred the crates, sending debris, splinters, and ballistic fragments. Sparks emitted from the crates upon impact. Bright white lights emitted from the black cylinders as it exploded, blinding the soldiers nearby, some of which ducked, attempting to find some cover. Slithers breathed out, jumping over the crate, aimed down the barrel of her rifle, swiftly pulling the trigger, gunning down the disoriented soldiers, bullets penetrating their chests as they fell. Reloading, she jumped behind a crate where another soldier was down. He swiftly moved up, and fortunately for Slithers, he was in perfect melee range. He swung his rifle at her. She blocked the stop with her own arm, hastily pulled out a knife. The blade impaled his throat. She twisted the knife, rending his neck. She ran behind the last line of defense and up towards the sentry towers, aiming up high, and unloaded into the sentries, pushing on the alarms for more soldiers to come up from down below. Slithers fired upon the last line of defense from behind. The remaining soldiers were immediately killed as bullets penetrated their bodies from numerous directions. Ghost raised his hand and dropped it, motioning to Ticker to follow him as he ran to Slithers. "Slithers, turn that damn alarm off." Slithers went to the sentry towers, climbing up the ladder, and shortly after Ghost saw her in the tower, the alarms stopped. "Ticker, plant it right here." Ghost pointed to the ground, where there appeared to be a barely noticeable crack in it. With some sand which blew over their feet, the sand itself poured ever so slightly into the crack. He knew this much larger door was for much larger machinery. This would be the best point of entry. After all, every unfortunate soul down there already knew trouble was coming. He glanced over to Ticker and pointed at the crack. Ticker took out the device and attached heavy-duty magnets on the bottom, planting it upright over the door. Ticker flicked a switch and a red light turned on. Ghost exhaled deeply, taking just a moment to reflect on the magnitude of what he was doing, and taking a moment to realize that this was going to be the closest thing to a funeral they would ever get. "We'll wait," Ghost said with a panting breath. "We'll wait until they get here." The remnants of Task Force 7 pulled corpses together behind a building about 15 meters from the explosive. Ghost took an arm from one of the corpses and cut it open, pouring the blood over his face. The three of them pulled together some smaller crates in front of the body of corpses. Ticker and Slithers followed his example as they hid underneath the bodies, their eyes open, watching. They all took measured breaths, allowing their heart rates to finally slow down as they hid underneath the mass of bodies. They had been racing ever since the first shot was fired, and none of them remembered how long ago that was. 3 days? A month? None of them had any sense of time anymore. They hadn't slept since it started. Time had passed. Ghost couldn't tell how much time, but he knew that it was long enough for the enemy to regroup from Butcher's efforts. But they took far longer than necessary. Ghost assumed security below was waiting for further orders before coming up from their little foxhole. Perhaps General Snells assumed that the modest force at Area 51 would hold them off long enough for an appropriate response. One thing was for certain. General Snells was coming for them, and he never left a stone unturned. Ghost knew this from working with him for the last decade and a half. They certainly took their time getting here. Ghost saw the soldiers walking on the premise. He saw their gazes and their heads turning, looking over the carnage. He saw their eyes always aiming down the barrel of their rifles. Their faces were grimacing and cringing with the stench. But there was one thing different about these soldiers than the rest of them. They had clean faces, as if they weren't out today or on leave and coming back from leave to see all of their friends dead, and who else to blame for that than them? Task Force 7. These soldiers had a black eagle patch on their shoulders. Ghost's eyes scanned from underneath the arm resting over his head, trying to get a count of the Black Eagle soldiers. Many of them were hiding behind parked armored vehicles, their sights trained on the corner of the buildings, places where Ghost would normally hide for cover, but not against this foe. He heard the whirring of the helicopter blades coming closer, dusting the sand off the perimeter and into Ghost's face. He closed his eyes and continued to listen to heavy boots clamor on the metal plates covering the ground. There was that one thing that truly concerned him. Where is that damned sniper? Ghost had no choice but to carefully listen to the number of footsteps taken, continuing with each pace as the rapidly approaching steps were now faster than their beating hearts. It was impossible to discern where precisely they were, but they likely marched down the middle as he suspected that they would, right to the device. He knew too well. He counted their footsteps right when he thought them to have passed over the device. "Ticker," he whispered. Ticker needed no more words. He pulled out the remote on his side pocket and pushed the black button. The device started whirring. The light blinked red rapidly. The soldiers who were right in front of the device saw it, glanced down swiftly, and stepped backward. "It's a trap!" one of them called. Boom. The explosion was like a small hurricane, blowing flames and debris in all directions. The soldiers immediately caught in the blast were now black, unrecognizable husks. Others flailed into the nearby buildings, and other objects snapping their bodies' limbs were strewn over the vicinity. Ghost could hear the bones cracking and crushing underneath the tremendous velocity and sudden halting of their repetitive trajectories, at least those that landed closer to him. Outside, by the armored vehicles, the soldiers' eyes gaped open in a daze. Immediately, they retrained their aim at the vicinity, looking for movement for whoever remained from Task Force 7. "Now!" Ghost cried out. The remnants of Task Force 7 jumped from underneath the bodies, sprinting toward the explosion where the door into the bowels of Area 51 lay. They were more refreshed and confident, firing at the armored vehicles. They were right there, by the hole. Slithers jumped down, throwing a dazed soldier off the internal catwalk into a burning heap as molten metal seeped from the opening, melting through the bottom of Area 51. Ghost was a few steps in front of the hole, and Ticker followed behind him. Bang. His heart raced again. His eyes shifted behind the armored vehicle to the flash. "Sniper, you again." He could see the bullet flying right toward him. The bullet was too close for him to dodge it. "Goodbye." He closed his eyes, welcoming the precisely aimed bullet. Thwick. Ghost's eyes opened. Blood sprayed across his face. In front of him was an arm, severed by the shot. He swiftly looked to his right, and Ticker was in front of him. The ballistic fragments scattered as they struck Ghost's arm. He now knew the round of the sniper, a .50 caliber beret. Ghost saw Ticker pulling out a satchel with his other arm. "Take this, quick." He looked at his arm, pouring the blood out of it like a faucet. His other arm trembled as his body began to feel the effects of rapid blood loss. Ticker breathed deeply, shaking his head. "I can't get you much time, but damn it, I'll try." Ticker kicked Ghost into the hole, and he charged towards the armored vehicles. It was not long before the roar of gunfire continued, drowning out the screams. Ghost landed on his feet, following Slithers down the steel-grated walkway. His calculations were correct. The damage done here was more than enough to send the soldiers on the upper levels to their untimely demise, and sending significant disarray to everyone else. The guards down here were disheveled, looking in every direction, not going into their battle stations, not knowing where everything was. Many kept their hands on top their heads, limping to their next location, while others were laying on the ground, covering their wounds with their hands, trying to keep themselves from bleeding out. "Perhaps if they didn't rely on us too much, they might have a chance down here. We carried your burdens, you little shits." Ghost and Slithers descended to the second level. Ghost sucked in the air through his teeth, stifling a whimpered cry. And then there was only 2 left. He knew it was time, but that didn't make it this any easier. He raised his rifle, firing with Slithers at the disorganized men below. Their corpses littered the ground, and their blood painted the walls. They made it down 3 more levels. The stench of gunpowder filled the air. Red lights from the alarms flared, and the buzzing pierced their ears. This level was more open, and the soldiers were more organized, preparing barricades and riot shields. There was reinforced steel for cover. Even Ghost and Slithers' rounds would not pierce them. Soldiers held their ground behind cover. "Slithers, take right!" He pointed right. She went to the right, firing at the shield walls, keeping the soldiers behind cover as Ghost strode to the left. Ghost took a deep breath, his lungs and body filled with an unnatural energy, yet it felt natural, like the natural essence of humanity. This essence passed through his body, and he suddenly felt refreshed as black veins protruded on his skin. He felt the temperature drop, his hair sticking on end as he passed through the barricade behind their iron defense. The soldiers' eyes stretched open, and their trigger fingers trembled as he opened fire behind them. These soldiers immediately turned around and shot through Ghost. Slithers flipped over the other side, crossing her fire with Ghost's line of sight. The soldiers were a disorganized mess as they started shooting in random directions. Their fire was immediately suppressed as their bodies strewn behind the reinforced steel cover. Their blood made a large pool at Ghost and Slithers' feet. Ghost's black veins receded back into his body. "1 more level," Ghost said. "1 more level and we're done." Bang. A shot came from above. His eyes opened wide before hastily spinning around, aiming his rifle to the top of the catwalk, from which stood a single marksman. Ghost pulled the trigger of his rifle, and he felt uncontrolled kickback into his shoulder as the bullet ripped through the marksman. The walls were painted with blood. Suddenly, Ghost realized that the shot was not aimed for him. Turning around, he looked at the worst thing he could imagine. Slithers. And suddenly, He knew pain. She smiled as tears streamed down her face. She covered the wound with her hand. Black blood spilled through the cracks of her hand like the inside of a sinking ship. Ghost had enough medical training to assume the bullet struck the liver. She leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. He bolted over to her, pulling out a medkit, hoping against hope to save her. "No, there isn't time," she said, grabbing onto his hand with hers. "They're coming down. I don't have long. You know it's not worth it. You don't have time to waste with what's left. I will stay behind and will myself to buy you what you need." Ghost didn't want to be alone. He inhaled and exhaled deeply, trying to mask his frustration. He didn't want to cry, but couldn't stop a singular tear from rolling down his face. She was the last person he ever wanted to say goodbye to. And now, he couldn't even muster the right words. "I understand," was all he managed to say. He turned and sprinted to the set of stairs, heading down to the last level. "Ghost!" she shouted. She shouldn't be wasting energy talking. Be quiet about it. Hearing the echoes of military boots descending from above, he snapped at her. If only there was more time. What little time we had in this world. "I'm glad that I got to spend my last moments with you," she said. I don't know how to say this, so I'll be blunt. I love you." He nodded. "I love you too." "Ghost, if by some miracle you make it through this, promise me this, that you will live and hold no hatred in your heart for the hell we've been through. Promise me that you will find another light, even a small fading one should suffice. Now go. There isn't time." Another tear escaped his eye. He could find no words. He nodded to her and turned. "This isn't fair. What did we do to deserve this?" He sprinted down the stairs, down into the next level. Ghost inhaled the essence from the air, and red veins protruded from underneath his skin. When he came to a whitely lit room, the metal rods were polished. Some were rising from sudden changing in the water levels. There were 4 large bronze tubes connecting these tubes to more volatile parts of the reactor. His eyes scanned the top of the room to locate the command center. His eyes canned downward. Again, from a doorway, red around the hinges. He moved around the first bronze tube and strapped a bomb to it. He placed the strap close to the bottom. Now, if anyone was looking for it, then they would find it. But Ghost was sure they would not be looking for it. They'd be too busy trying to kill him. Not more than 5 minutes passed, and the room behind him was roaring with gunfire. It would not be long before he was completely, utterly alone, and they would be on him shortly, like flies on a pile of shit. He could not be certain if he had enough time to prime the bomb for explosion, and he still didn't know why any of this was happening. He finished priming the bomb, and he inhaled some of the essence from the air, and the veins crawled from his skin, moving themselves from him and encasing the bomb. One of the silver rods ruptured, and steam filled the room. Ghost felt the radiation and the tremendous heat filling the air. He felt heat open up patches of his skin. The lightheadedness followed, running toward the exit, tripping over his feet. This continued as the radiation seeped into his body. At such a high degree, he vomited on the door. Swinging it open, he jumped inside and slammed the door shut behind him, panting and breathing in more essence. There was an explosion in the reactor, followed by several rapid strikes against the door from chunks of radioactive debris. "The bomb was unnecessary. I literally came down here in the middle of a meltdown. Are you serious?" "Well, that was part of the problem anyway, but that didn't mean they can't stop the reactor from blowing. One more thing left." Glancing up the stairs, he saw the last door leading upward to the command center. That reactor explosion bought him enough time. He inhaled the essence from the air, and the red veins on his skin faded into his body. The veins returned to his body a light cerulean. His strides sent him up the stairs, tackling through the door to an empty command center. He swiftly looked to the monitors, seeing the soldiers move away from the reactor from where he was going. The soldiers placed iron blockades to the reactor before shifting down other corridors, congregating elsewhere. Ghost shook his head and sighed as he grabbed a chair and logged into the mainframe of the computer, disabling the failsafe procedures. He locked the console. He took a deep breath. "Goodbye, Slithers. I love you, and Ticker, and Butcher, and all of you. You're my only friends. I'll see you soon." Ghost was fatigued, pushing the chair out from under him, his eyes narrowed toward the door, heading out the other end of the corridor, where he assumed the command center evacuated to. He took a deep breath of relief, and this last-minute mission was to be a success, but now he had to pretend to want to make it out, to keep them away from the command center, to reset the protocols. "I'll see you soon." He breathed in the essence from the steel and iron in the room, and the blue veins turned gray and opened the door. The corridor was empty, but clattered and clamored with heavy boots stomping down the hall. Ghost aimed down his sights as he ran down the hall. He made a turn down the hall, sprinting down from stairs, and rushed out the door. Bullets immediately shot past his head. He returned fire against soldiers stationed up the catwalks. His eyes glanced to the side, and his best friend lay there in a pool of her own black blood. Slithers was pelted with bullet holes filling her body, and all her limbs were pelted and penetrated, that they all severed, being scattered across the room. Blood overflowed from her mouth. As if it wasn't enough, for good measure, someone left a K-bar knife protruding from her heart, impaled blade deep. 1 month ago, Slithers and Ghost were laying down in a field of Paulding forest, laying down in the empty space, staring at the break in the trees. The moon and stars shone bright this night. Ghost's hands interwove Slithers' fingers together. They were alone, together. They were not off fighting, not with the rest of the Task Force 7, and far away from the U.S. military. They were alone, except for the few crickets singing their songs. Ghost felt her fingers tightly grip his, and she pulled him to his side, and they locked eyes. Slithers smiled that smile, but bags filled her eyes with exhaustion, the same bags he always wore upon his face. "We'll be free soon," she told him that night, but she still held that smile, curled upon her lips. The ground sparked as bullets continued flying toward him. He laid down, suppressing fire. He lobbed a smoke grenade on his position and lobbed numerous grenades down the hall and through the catwalks. The halls echoed with gunfire as the smoke obscured his visibility. Taking off his equipment vest, he ripped another vest off a corpse. Several more bullets came closer, penetrating him into the limbs of his chest. Coughing, he donned an enemy's vest. He sprinted through the smoke, firing at soldiers hiding from behind the cover of the other rooms. 3 levels to get to the surface. Just 3. Ghost grimaced, grinding his teeth as the fire from the guns lit up the face around him. His watery eyes glimmered with the bright lights of bullets emitting from their respective rifles. Bullets which struck him in these gray veins sparked around him. He never blinked as he rushed to the stairs. Clunk, clunk, clunk. A dropped grenade clinked against the stairs as it fell. The echo to Ghost was louder to him than the constant gunfire. His attention shifted focus as he was in mid-stride. The grenade started flashing fire from behind, its pineapple shape sending shards everywhere. Instinctively, his veins breathed in more essence, and he felt refreshed as if water coursed through these veins. He knew this was unnatural. The gray light in these veins over his body thickened. Find the light. Whatever light flickers, find it, Ghost thought. The explosion sent the shards piercing through his body, ripping out through the back. Blood sprayed out. He felt cold as the blood dispelled from his body. The explosion propelled him backward. He landed on the ground, rolling on his side. He immediately stood up and sprinted back to the stairs. He aimed down his iron sights as he reloaded his rifle with his sleight of hand. He charged up the stairs, screaming as the gray veins persisted on his body, aiming down the iron sights, shooting everyone in his path. His aim was never faulty, despite the lack of spirit that he had. His spirit felt like it was a man hanging from a noose over the Grand Canyon. His heart was empty. He stopped caring as the bullets penetrated these monsters' bodies, letting them plop to the ground like empty husks being prepared for their tombs. He stopped caring about the lives that he was taking. He stopped caring about the country that he fought tooth and nail to protect. But more importantly, he stopped caring about his life. He ran, leaving a trail of blood behind him as he made it to the next level, which had little more cover than before. He simply jumped over fallen filing cabinets. Bullets sprayed from above as the roaring continued with heavy machine gun fire. More of that essence filled his body, and the veins of his body swelled. Clunk, emitting more gray light in the room. Bullets hit Ghost, but they struck the veins. Coming to a halt, the bullets shattered, and fragments deflected off his body. He still felt the impact push vibrations through him. So much blood. I fought for this. I never would have if I knew that this was going to be the futile result. Peace. This is your idea of some cruel joke? Because this isn't funny, and I'm not laughing, he cried out loud, his voice screaming into the halls, his voice only silenced by the roar of the flames. He made it through another doorway. Boom. A great ball of fire was being hurled at him from the other side of the level. He swiftly turned, being hit by a burning filing cabinet. He felt the warmth of the flames, and the immediate thrust bruised his arms. His firm grip was nearly ripped away from his rifle. The filing cabinet pinned him against the wall. The fire burned his clothes as he hastily pushed the incendiary filing cabinet off him. He let the orange air burn as he got up, ignoring its caress on his body. It could only be described as an alien sensation. Nothing more. Nothing more. At last, Ghost made it to the morning, on top of Area 51. Sighing heavily with a pulsing chest, he breathed in more essence from the air, and the gray veins receded into his skin, returning to cerulean. He carefully eyed soldiers, training their sights on him from behind the rubble, no doubt thanks to Ticker, whose body was nowhere to be seen. Standing upon the rubbled plains, he stared, knowing full well a gunfight with his exhaustion was suicide. Hell, why did he care anymore? He took a long look at the soldiers surrounding him like an animal in a cage. After all, that is all any of us were. Just an animal who needs to be put down. This had better have been worth it. His fingers trembled, scampering with heightened pace. He raised up his rifle like a club. His cerulean veins crawled from his hand to the rifle. Swinging the rifle down, the rifle and the veins attached to the rifle shattered as it sliced through the soldier's ballistic helmet and the soldier's skull. He pulled the pin out of the grenade hanging from the soldier's vest as he kicked the corpse, rolling him into the rest of the platoon. He turned to another soldier, who was running at him, using his own rifle as a club. Ghost ducked and swung his foot into the soldier's windpipe. The grenade exploded, sending the corpse's limbs flying and metallic debris into the soldiers nearby. Ghost dashed at the group, loosely pulling out his K-bar knife and slit the throat of another soldier. Soldiers screamed out, trying to put down the animal before more pinless grenades fell from the body of a woman he just killed. Ghost dashed to another group of soldiers. Bullets began to impale him again as an explosion sent more debris his way. Only one platoon left. Ghost struck the man in the chest with his knife. A soldier who had some life in him ripped out a pin of a grenade as he stabbed Ghost in the arm, twisting the blade. Ghost felt the blade twisting in his arm, but pain was just as elusive as ever. Ghost ripped out the knife from the soldier's hands, stabbing his tendon, ripping himself away before the grenade blew. Shards of fragments of the grenade penetrated Ghost, ripping apart his flesh. His fingers trembled again. He turned to the side and threw a spinning knife, impaling a soldier between the eyes. He took a deep breath as he strode on the scorching hot ground with the blue veins moving faster than before. As his body felt like a soulless husk, his face became still like it was carved in a mountain. Ghost pulled a grenade from his own pocket. He pulled the pin out and threw it behind him. He pulled out a second grenade. He pulled the pin out of the second grenade, lobbing it behind him. He started slashing at these soldiers' necks with the knife, which dulled. The grenades behind him blew. The roar of the blast was deafening, and the dying, gurgling screams of soldiers behind him continued. Ghost impaled the last soldier with an iron pipe from a plumbing apparatus. The corpse trembled and leaned on him before collapsing to his feet. He heard groans of soldiers who had not yet passed to the other side. He pulled out his sidearm and pointed at the nearest one and pulled the trigger. The man's brains splattered on the ground. Ghost retracted his sidearm to his holster, eyes wide, and he didn't want to bring himself to look at the mound of bodies around him, many of which he'd killed. But he did. The sands were stained in blood, and carcasses were blown away in the wind, and limbs were scattered all over the rubble. His heart sank as he realized again the sanctity of life and how easy it was for him to take it away. Violence. It's all he ever knew, and even then it succeeded. Or was he perhaps the epitome of human failure? Finally, having a moment, memories swept over his mind of his comrades, their faces and their smiles, as if compelled to remember them not in pain, but of happiness. A life filled with nothing but constant war, and this was the result. He gritted his teeth, as he knew not what to fight for. Not anymore. He was the last of the Task Force 7, the only survivor. Damn it all, why was this happening? This was supposed to be a training exercise. He felt like a dull stake was being violently hammered into his chest without ceasing as the guilt swept over him. I murdered these people. I murdered everyone. Bang. He looked up at the flash in the distance. His heart jumped and then settled back down as he remembered he didn't care anymore. The caliber round penetrated his chest and blood sprayed out of his back. The blue veins retreated back underneath his skin and he resembled a normal human being. The numerous bullet holes and Ghost's standing corpse were now flowing out of him like he was a strainer. To live and die in obscurity. A corpse is all I ever was, and all I ever will be. He coughed as blood sprayed out of his mouth. He still looked onward at the sniper. Finish it. Just as he thought those last words, he heard a loud whistle in the air. His head tilted up as blood drooled from his mouth. Black birds in the morning horizon flew swiftly. Their velocity rang in his ears as they came overhead. More whistling came, and he looked right above him as the planes swept overhead, and large metallic cylinders dropped out of the tummies of these planes. He smiled, and he let out a chuckle as he grasped onto his elbow with the knife impaled in it. Uncle Sam spared no expense on them. Ghost covered his heart with his hand as he took a deep breath, not making a move. I pledge allegiance to the flag. The bombs struck right beside him, clouding everything in sight. The explosions and flames pushed through him in a torrent of fire. The red air caressed his corpse as sharp debris penetrated him, ripping his flesh apart. Nothing would escape as the fighter jets turned back around and lit the field up with their guns. This continued until nothing remained. Area 51 became a crater filled with rubble, limbs and burnt faces, melted dog tags. The smoke was filled with radioactive particles, and the ground became a hazardous wasteland. The buildings were brought to ruin, the remains scattered in the wind. Blood watered the ground. Every single inch.